Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility, and they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. This episode is one many parents approach with a lot of fear, because documenting harm to your child can feel like walking a tightrope. On one side, you're terrified of minimizing what your child is experiencing. On the other, you are afraid of being accused of exaggerating, diagnosing, or putting words in your child's mouth. That fear is not irrational. Courts scrutinize child impact documentation very closely. Not because they don't care about children, but because they're extremely cautious about how harm is framed. This is where many protective parents get hurt unintentionally. Not because they lie, not because they are dramatic, but because they try to explain too much. Let me say something important right now. You do not need to diagnose harm for it to be real. And in court documentation, diagnosing harm often weakens your credibility rather than strengthening it. Harm in the ECHO method is not about labels. It's not about saying your child has trauma. It's not about saying your child is anxious because of the other parent. It's not about predicting long-term psychological damage. Harm answers one question only. What has changed for the child in observable ways? Observable means something another adult could reasonably notice. That distinction matters more than most parents realize. When parents document harm by naming diagnoses or assigning psychological meaning, courts often hear this parent is interpreting. When parents document harm by describing observable changes, courts hear this parent is reporting. Reporting is credible. Interpreting is debatable. Here is an example. Writing. My child is traumatized by visits. That may be true and often is, but it's a conclusion. Writing. Following visits, the child experienced difficulty sleeping for 2 consecutive nights and required support to settle. That's an observation. One invites argument. The other invites concern. This is one of the hardest shifts for parents to make, especially parents who are emotionally attuned to their children. You may understand your child deeply, but court documentation is not the place to demonstrate insight. It's the place to demonstrate observation. Another place parents get tripped up is with child statements. Parents worry, if I don't write down what my child says, it won't be taken seriously. So, they record verbatim statements, sometimes long ones, without context. That can backfire. Courts are very cautious about children being positioned as reporters. This does not mean you ignore what your child says. It means you frame it carefully. Documenting harm does not mean transcribing your child's emotions. It means noting when statements occurred, where the circumstances around them, whether statements were spontaneous or prompted, whether similar statements repeat over time. Again, observation over interpretation. There's another layer to harm documentation that matters deeply. Harm is not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up quietly. Changes in routine, regression, increased anxiety around transitions, shifts in behavior at school, physical complaints without medical cause. These things may not feel big enough to document, especially if you're used to minimizing. But when they repeat, they matter. Courts don't expect children to be visibly falling apart to take harm seriously. They look for patterns of impact. This is why restraint matters so much here. When parents document every emotional fluctuation, the record becomes noisy. When parents document changes over time, the record becomes clear. Another fear parents carry is this: what if documenting harm makes me look like I'm trying to build a case? I want to say this carefully. Documenting harm does not make you adversarial. Diagnosing harm does. Predicting harm does. Assigning intent does. Simply recording what you observe is not aggressive, it's responsible. Your job is not to persuade the court that harm exists. Your job is to make harm visible. There's a difference. And here's something my attorneys emphasized repeatedly. When harm is real, you don't need strong language. Strong language often weakens real harm. Neutral language allows harm to stand on its own. This also protects you emotionally. When you document harm neutrally, you don't have to relive it as intensely. You don't have to prove how bad it was. You simply note what changed. That creates distance. And distance protects your nervous system. Let me say something important here. If you're worried about whether something counts as harm, that worry alone tells me you're not exaggerating. Parents who exaggerate don't question themselves like that. Documenting harm responsibly is about humility. It's about saying, this is what I observed. I am not diagnosing. I am not speculating. I am recording. Courts trust that posture. And when harm repeats, especially across different settings or observers, it becomes very difficult to dismiss. That's why documenting harm without diagnosing is one of the most powerful things you can do. It keeps the focus on the child. It keeps you credible. And it allows the system to do its job without you forcing it. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to be perfect. And you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.